Okay.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our IDS series on inclusive trade. The fifth United Nations Conference on Least Developed Countries is ongoing in Qatar. And from all the messaging and very interesting discussions going on, it is clear that there is need and call for bold action along with development cooperation to really achieve meaningful progress towards sustainable development in least developed countries. An important pathway to achieve this is inclusive trade. So how do we better support and integrate least developed countries in international trade? While there are certainly very useful existing trading arrangements, it is also evident that LDC participation has remained largely stagnant. Today's roundtable discusses this very question: enhancing the participation of LDCs in international trade towards informing the UN LDC5 agenda. We will discuss enhancing participation of LDCs in global value chains through simple modifications to existing trade arrangements. Our discussion today will focus on the role of a new, existing but new agenda, which has been termed very usefully as global value chains for LDCs, a scheme that can potentially play quite an important role in advancing inclusive trade for LDCs. We are joined by a very exciting panel today. We've got Lucian Cernat, Head of Global Regulatory Cooperation and International Procurement Negotiations, European Commission. We've also got Stephen Karingi, Director, Regional Integration and Trade Division, United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, as well as Lena Gardemeister, Deputy Director General, Department for International Trade, Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland. So to start us off, the new GVCs for LDCs scheme. For those of you who haven't joined us earlier in our very first inclusive trade seminar, are in luck because we've got Lucian with us again. And let me now ask Lucian to kind of jog our memory back, but also tell us more about this new evidence that has come up. So Lucian, why don't you tell us about the GVCs for LDCs agenda and why this should be an important action going forward?
Many thanks, Amrita. Hello, colleagues. Hello, everyone. I'm very delighted to be here again in the very informative series run by the Institute of Development Studies, and with a very clear path that you have already explained, Amrita. My task now is slightly easier, so I'd like to perhaps only move ahead by presenting a few elements that will allow us to have a meaningful discussion on what can we do more to integrate least developed countries, and also in line with your agenda on inclusive trade. In this particular example that I wanted to illustrate today, also small farmers. So it's not just about the poorest countries in the world, but it's also about small producers and small farmers in the poorest countries in the world who are perhaps somewhat surprisingly already pretty well integrated in some niche products, but there can be more that we can do to facilitate the development potential of such supply chains. So today, I wanted to illustrate this broader idea, this broader proposal dubbed GVCs for LDCs, with a very specific case study on exports from LDCs of organic products, an area where they're very well placed, as we shall see in a minute, and I think where we can tick many boxes in terms of sustainable trade and inclusive trade for the kind of, I think, stakeholders that we want to encourage to benefit from international trade. So this is work that I carried out with my colleague, Adria Berga-Augusti, and I'd like to mention also explicitly that these views that I will express today are our personal views as the authors, and they do not necessarily represent the views of the European Commission. Let me now perhaps just move very quickly to I will skip, in the interest of time, most of the rationale for the proposal, the dire need to ensure that least developed countries have a greater participation in international trade, simply because you have explored already very well the issue. We are in the middle of the UN LDC summit, so I'm sure that the understanding of the need for trade-led development is the case is very well made, so I don't want to belabor the point too much. But just to say that here, for instance, if you look at the assessment from a major development organizations of the current situation for LDCs, one could immediately see that there is a very acute, a very important need for us to perhaps put forward new ideas that could help LDCs, because they are in a dire situation, and they are probably in one of the worst crises in recent years because of the combination of multiple things that have happened so far, and also because we've been trying to help least developed countries over time with a number of trade rules, with many trade arrangements that were particularly designed to help LDCs to integrate in global supply chains, to participate in world trade. Here I list some of these elements in the existing schemes that have been in existence, and they work relatively well. It's not that they haven't produced benefits. They did produce benefits, and there's ample evidence that schemes like Everything But Arms that the European Union has been offering to LDCs with unrestricted, full-fledged, duty-free, quota-free on all products have made an important difference for LDCs. So there is perhaps also this paradox that, in a sense, we have offered LDCs, at least on the face of them and in the traditional sense, the most generous trade arrangements. And yet, as you said, Amrita, their share in world trade has been stagnant for decades. We are still very far behind the UN Sustainable Development Goal objective of promoting the integration of LDCs in world trade towards a target of 2% of world trade. We're still not there in 2% of world exports. LDCs are halfway through, and they have been there for quite some years. And so there is this paradox of them not being able to integrate successfully, us using all our tools in the trade policy. So it may be, people say, well, what's left? Is it really something that we can do more using trade, or has trade run its course for LDCs when it comes to development? Well, the good news is that there can still be things we can offer to LDCs, simply because for the time being, the existing tools have, I would say, concentrated on direct trade. The kind of traditional trade flows that used to happen decades ago, where products did not cross from one country to another along different stages of production before reaching the final consumer. But if we were to take that logic, this is the logic of global businesses. So if you were to apply this logic to trade policy, there is scope for us to further liberalize the LDC products that are imported in a particular country. They are then incorporated in a more sophisticated product. If we use, as I tried over time since I launched this idea, to use mangoes as an example, that's why I even call this the mango theory. It's one thing to export raw mangoes. So for that kind of exports from LDCs, we already gave them everything we could. But what happens if raw mangoes, fresh mangoes, are incorporated in a beverage or in an agri-food, in some food products, and they are exported not from an LDC, but say from the United States or from Brazil or from other countries to the EU, or vice versa, from the EU to the United States or to Brazil? There, the LDC mango is trapped in the wrong product, which keeps paying duties, often double-digit duties around the world. So this is the untapped potential of allowing LDC products to be further integrated in global supply chains by giving an incentive to producers to source the existing very competitive products that LDC produce also for their global operations. And in doing so, these intermediaries and these producers, these sometimes multinational companies or even food processors, for instance, in our case for organic products, they will also have an incentive because they will get a tariff reduction, a pro rata tariff reduction, which is proportionate to the value of LDC content that they would introduce in their processed food. So essentially here we're talking about a triple benefit for LDCs. We would offer products that incorporate LDC ingredients, a tariff preference, which currently doesn't necessarily happen. So as I said, on many food products, if you trade between two countries that do not have an FTA, if you introduce LDC ingredients in those products, they still pay the full tariff. Here, they would get an incentive and an advantage from a tariff reduction. The second benefit for LDCs is that given the dynamics in the market for such future processes, you have a relatively small batch of producers. LDCs are, after all, small in the world market, and you will have the world competing to get a share of that pie. So everyone will compete for LDC ingredients because that gives them tariff preferences. So you increase the demand for the products that LDCs produce already, and that will give a higher price premium to existing producers in LDCs. They don't have to produce necessarily more to benefit. They may be able to increase their terms of trade, as we call them, this price premium, which indeed will immediately allow them, without necessarily boosting their production. Sometimes they have production constraints, but based on the existing production, they can get a bigger development dividend from trade. And last but not least, perhaps in the medium term, if not immediately, the same processors that would buy these LDC inputs, the fresh products, the pineapples and the mangoes and the cashew nuts and all these ingredients, the vanillas, all the things that I'm going to show you in a minute, they would have probably over a long term an interest to invest more in LDCs, because the closer you are to your sources of the future tariff preferences, the closer you are to these suppliers. Remember, these are limited suppliers, so you are competing with many other companies for these LDC ingredients. If you are investing in LDCs, you will be closer to these suppliers. You can probably upscale the domestic production. You can move the ladder to produce a few more sophisticated, more value-added products in the LDCs themselves. So you would have an FDI attraction effect from a trade initiative. Of course, it's not going to happen over time, and it may not happen everywhere. You would need to have some supportive policies, but the potential is there. So just to illustrate where we are today and where we want to go, I created here a very practical, a very simple schematic example of the additional benefits that we can offer LDCs. So the GVCs of today, in the orange kind of color, you have LDC direct exports, say coffee beans. They go to the first country of destination, and there they either stay local or they may be further processed. They may be put in some Nespresso capsules, and then they will sell all over the world. Now, these Nespresso capsules, which contain coffee from LDCs, they will face duties unless there are arrangements which, in any event, they do not take care and they do not pay attention to LDC content. These tariffs are MFN or FTA. They are not taking into account the need to integrate LDCs. So LDC coffee beans, the moment they are further processed and re-exported, they will face full duties. The initiative says, look, if you import coffee beans from Ethiopia, you process that in Switzerland, and you make the George Clooney famous capsule, and now you want to sell it all over the world. Why don't you reduce the tariff faced by this processed product, these Nespresso capsules, proportionate to the value of the coffee that you sourced in Ethiopia? And in doing so, you derive all these benefits that I described earlier. So this is where we left the proposal when last time I presented this to Amrita and her colleagues a couple of years ago. I think there was a lot of interest in the proposal. It was somewhat theoretical, and although people say, yeah, it makes sense. It remains somewhat as a potential for the future. Now, the good news is that we at the European Commission have a unique data set, which allows us to illustrate the potential of this initiative with real data, with data from 1 million transactions of EU imports of organic products. And you will see why this is an interesting sort of, not just an interesting angle for analysis, but perhaps also a very promising starting point for a real initiative, for a pilot study, because it allows us to use existing digital tools for traceability and other elements that are extremely important to operationalize these kind of proposals in practice. So one word about the platform, it's called Traces. So Traces is the digital platform that we use in the EU to trade in organic products. It is used by 90 countries, by 90 trading partners. So essentially, it's a global digital platform. Everyone who wants to sell organic products to the EU will have to be registered in Traces. It's a very user-friendly, very simple platform, which allows, as I said, and as you will see in a minute, even small farmers from remote places in LDCs to essentially connect to the platform and be able to sell the products, perhaps through intermediaries and other players in the supply chain. So we have 1 million firm level data of organic trade, including from LDCs for several years from 2017. And here we see a number of crucial elements to assess the GVC for LDC proposal, because we see the producers, the names of the producers, the country from exportation, but also the country through which products travel to Europe. So these traceability requirements that are part of the EU legislation, and that they are very effectively implemented in these digital tools, will allow us to trace products if the coffee beans move from Ethiopia to Mexico before going to the EU. That will be seen in the data. And this is on the basis of these firm level traceability records that we have in Traces that I managed to produce a few key findings, which I hope you'll find it interesting as well. So this is very schematically how things work. You are a producer, you have to get your product accredited by an independent lab. They will test your product to guarantee that this is an organic product. You have your certificate. It has to have all these traceability requirements. It crosses the border, the custom official looks at it. And if you tick all the boxes, it is then released in the EU, in all our supermarkets, with this famous logo of organic certification. It's a pan-European quality certificate that gives products and producers a premium market, basically. And this is a very dynamic market. It's a growing market. European consumers, they are very interested and they are prepared to pay a price for organic products. So there's a lot of potential in the future. Now, as I said, the GVC for LDC try to facilitate, and we're looking at this indirect exports from LDCs. So of course, you will see in the Traces database in the green, the kind of the direct exports that the traditional trade policy in Europe has already generously offered all the benefits that LDCs can have. There are no quotas, there are no tariffs. Of course, for organic products, you have the certification requirement, but that's valid for everyone. And what is in the orange or reddish kind of colors is the other ways in which LDC products travel around the world. They can be imported in the EU, but once you export them along the value chains, again, this is something we could perhaps further explore and give tariff preferences to LDCs content in EU exports now. But also we import products from plenty of other countries, which they contain significant amounts of LDC ingredients. And these products, when they come to Europe, they do not necessarily enter, like in the green channel, duty-free, quota-free. So again, a lot of untapped potential for LDC exporters who would like to be better integrated in the supply chain. So if we look at the data, what do we see? Well, the first key finding, it was really an astonishing surprise. I even asked my co-author, who is a full-time custom official in Spain. He's doing this for a living. And I said, Adria, are we sure we haven't made a mistake here? How can it be so big? But it is. The data we have shows that LDCs account for 10% of all our organic imports. So if you compare this with the first chart I shown you, where LDCs remain at a very depressing, stagnant 1% of world exports. When it comes to exports of organic products to the EU, They're doing extremely well. They are moving steadily towards around 10% market share in the last year we have data available for. So they made steady progress and they are competitive. So this is the green channel, I would say, where, as I mentioned earlier, the fact that we offer them generous duty-free, quota-free, plus this digital easy certification that even small farmers can comply with. I say easy, I mean, certification in Europe, it can hardly be called easy. I think it's quite stringent. But the fact that they can comply with, there are some perhaps some fixed costs, but once you're in it, once you comply with these rules, it pays off. So this is the first message, that there are a lot of economic potential in this niche market of organic products. So here you can see, if you wanted another way to look at their competitiveness, you can see that Togo exports more organic products by weight to the EU than the United Kingdom. You can see that Madagascar sends and manages to sell, in value terms this time, more organic products to the EU than United States. So they are really in the top league. It's exactly where you would like, in an ideal world, LDCs to belong in order for trade to deliver their development benefits. So they can compete against the biggest and the most competitive players in organic products. And of course, they have a fairly concentrated structure. Many of these LDCs, they concentrate on very few but very successful, lucrative commodities. But you see that there are many LDCs that are already in the system. I think the important thing for any of them is that they are capable of being already integrated. The fixed cost of being part of such organic products has been already taken on board. So they are ready to move to the next level. And again, because we started the event with this inclusive trade, also the second quite astonishing finding that we realized when we looked at this very detailed, firm level, company by company transactions that we have on organic product, we see that small producers account for 82% of the transactions. Of course, they are not all into big value kind of transactions, but the fact that we have so many companies, so many small farmers in the poorest countries in the world who can export to the most demanding market of organic products, so with the highest quality standards, and using a user-friendly but nonetheless a sophisticated traceability or online tool for trade, these are extremely good news. It means we can rely on such schemes to facilitate their further integration. And the final, and I think the most important element for the proposal for the next level of integrating GVCs to LDCs is, as I announced at the very beginning, these products, they can be exported directly to Europe, but they are also exported via many other countries. So all in all, if we count also the exports of European countries, we import LDCs not just to consume them at home, and we will also export organic products around the world. So we have 27 member states that part of what we import directly, we will re-export, but paying tariffs. And part of what we import indirectly from 20 other partners around the world, these are LDC ingredients in products which will probably still pay duties. I was extremely curious, for instance, because Mexico is one of the most successful platforms, somewhat surprisingly perhaps, but Mexico has a very high intensity of exporting products to Europe with LDC ingredients. And I thought, well, but Mexico has an FTA with the EU, so maybe there isn't much we can do. But if you take the magnifying glass and if you look at every single product where LDC ingredients can be still be incorporated, you see that even in FTAs, you have examples and exceptions where products still pay duties. I wouldn't give you the exact example, but there is a product from Mexico to Europe that still has double-digit tariffs, despite the existence of an FTA. Or there may be a quota, or maybe there are rules of origin, which then the Mexican producer cannot fulfill because of the LDC ingredients, and they will not get the duty-free. So the fact that there is an FTA in place between one country or another does not necessarily mean that the development potential for LDCs has been exhausted. So again, looking at the key products for LDCs, here you see that they play, as I said, they play a very major role, and multinational companies, food processors, and other downstream producers, they can rely on LDCs as very strong players, very competitive players with both the quantity and the quality to provide cocoa beans, vanilla, coffee, soybeans, etc., all the way to mango and gum, Arabic gum. So there is a significant variety of products in this very microcosm, I would say, of organic products where still LDCs can benefit more. Now, to conclude, if you were to say, look, we may start with organic products, we have the digital tool that will allow us traceability. So there is no infrastructure cost for, say, if Brazil wants to import, a product from the EU that incorporates LDC ingredients. We have this tool, is there. Brazilians, both the authorities and the Brazilian exporters are familiar with it because they use it themselves to trade with us. You see all the evidence of this traceability of LDC ingredients in the tool. There is no need to prove origin or traceability because this cost has been already incurred. We did it for organic certification purposes. Now it can be reused as a trade facilitation tool for LDCs. But imagine you would scale this up to all the products that LDC export. Then the potential is much bigger. You would get, in our calculations that I did with another colleague a couple of years ago, you will get very close to the 2% SDG target over time that we all wanted to achieve. Even more importantly, LDCs will export via other developing countries. So another important objective of promoting South-South regional trade would also be boosted by such a scheme. It's not just LDCs exporting to Europe who will then export to India or Brazil. LDCs will export a lot through, and you could see also from the previous chart, through other regional players, South Africa, or even among themselves. So South-South trade will increase. There is no competition. It's a win-win situation. By promoting LDC trade, effectively, you increase exports of other developing countries. And that eventually will allow a greater participation of LDCs along supply chains, precisely as the WTO Director General recently mentioned in one of her speeches. So I hope that this provides sufficient it will intrigue people sufficiently enough for this idea to be taken forward in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucian. It was really great to revive the initiative and also see some of the new insights about organic products. And I think linking it further, looking at different development outcomes, I think beyond businesses and firms in the future, potentially using household level data may make this even more compelling. But for now, I would like to I have some questions for the other members of our panel today. And putting that sort of picture that Lucian has presented for us in perspective, along with the UN LDC5 agenda that is being discussed, we see, of course, there is a critical role for economic diversification, for structural transformation, and a risk, of course, of over-reliance on primary commodities. But we also know that there have been barriers, there have been, struggles and challenges in LDCs to move to value-added trade. Now, with that, and with those set of challenges and ambitions for structural transformation, Stephen, what do you think sort of are the key barriers for LDC participation in global value chains? And what do you see is the role for an initiative such as the GVC for LDCs, which identifies what is happening at the moment, but supports diversification along the value chain and also, building capabilities towards the future? So sorry for the long question, but I hope that's that kind of puts that in sets the scene.
Thank you very much, Amrita, and thanks, Lucian, for the clear presentation. Interestingly, I think the discussion on LDCs and their share on the global trade, I think this conversation has been there for a long time, since even in the lead up to the duty-free, quota-free market access, and even the desire to see those emerging economies with the ability to do so, to give duty-free, quota-free market access. And they continue to do so. If I'm not wrong, I think just last week, one of the emerging economies actually offered 98% of tariffs as duty-free, quota-free country market access for a few LDCs within this continent, at least in Africa. So we know what the issues have been, and I think that's what you're asking. One of the key issues has been the productive capacity, and this productive capacity being both in terms of technology, capabilities, skills. So we have ended with a situation whereby many LDCs continue to export non-value added commodities because of those barriers. And some of these things have actually been amplified by the huge demands for issues on standards. But it is interesting to see the results that the analysis that Lucian has given here on organics, because there is a standards dimension, of course, on organics, and we see such a huge share of LDCs being able to access the European market. But even after saying that, one of the key challenges has actually been the standards, the ability of the LDCs to meet the standards required in the destination markets. There is, of course, the big issue of the broader question of the rules of origin. I think sometimes the inability to accumulate rules of origin to take advantage of some of this market access that is offered, and the question of trade facilitation, high costs of lack of competitiveness because of the challenges that come with trade facilitation when these LDCs want to send their exports, especially those value-added exports to the rest of the world. And we know most of these, and that's why when you look at the trend of the share of LDCs, and I'm thinking here in my mind about the African LDCs in particular, because they are the majority. You look at the share where they were 10 years ago when we had the Istanbul Program of Action, and where they are now as we start the Doha Program of Action. You always get frustrated, or even when you do an analysis or a monitoring of the SDG 17, you always get frustrated because this share is not growing, and that's why I found this work on the GVCs for LDCs quite interesting. I did say that I saw the technical piece when it came out about 2-3 years ago, and I think it was quite convincing that if one has a good, because I think at that point the key question was, how do you trace the product that comes from an LDC country all the way to the end, under the whole idea of the trade in value added, and be able to say at this stage, this good can actually enter because there is an embodied content that came from an LDC country. So I find this initiative quite innovative. I don't see what it is that would make it impractical. And I also don't see why it is not as convincing as it is technically, because now we have a clear example on this organic. So I find it quite innovative. And even as I was going through this, I was even thinking that it also even gives us an opportunity to prepare for an even bigger challenge that the LDCs are going to face as we move into the era of climate action, because we are going to have now barriers to trade that are going to look at the carbon content, and some of this carbon content would be because of the lack of technology in these LDCs. So they are going to be penalized for not taking the care of the carbon content in what they export. So this GVC for LDCs, first of all, would help us demonstrate that it is possible to raise that share, to attract investments, because investors would see the potential to grow their markets if they are producing from an African from an LDC, and that is also going to give an opportunity for the renewing of the technology that would be required even as we go to this world where we have to start the process of decarbonization. So looking at it from that broad context, I see it as something that we need. Okay, maybe we can start the way you have started by looking at a few tariff lines that one can be able to trace and be able to show. I think I would push back on the idea that this would entrench commodity exports, because if you take the idea that trade intermediates can also occur among the LDCs, and if I talk about the region where I'm placed, where we have a big platform under the African Continental Free Trade Area that is going to make it possible for LDCs within the continent to trade with each other, something like this would give a two-track or two pathways for LDCs to grow their market within Africa in intra-African trade, but at the same time, a pathway for them to grow their exports to the rest of the world. So this is what I would say as an initial entry point. I am convinced technically with the arguments, with the use of the data and statistics to show that it's doable. And I think the issue was, how do you avoid leakage or misuse of such an initiative? And I think this traceability demonstrates that actually it can be done. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Stephen. It's really interesting to hear that there is sort of both belief and actual practical possibility to take this forward. I would now have a question for Lena. Both Lucian and Stephen mentioned the importance of support, complementary support, other kind of measures that would be really critical in making sure that this kind of a scheme, or even the LDC5 agenda for supporting economic diversification goes forward. What types of support? And this, of course, there's a huge debate about aid for trade, and there's also some concern about disconnect in how aid for trade might have, with local realities. Lucian gave us very compelling evidence about how there are benefits for smallholder farmers. But what type of support do you think is critical for expanding LDC participation in global value chains? And do you see an initiative like the GVC for LDCs agenda aligning with other types of support which LDCs would need to sort of further build value-added trade? Lena, over to you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Amrita, and thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this very important discussion. Thank you, Lucian, also for your interesting introduction on the GVCs for LDCs, and Stephen, for your views, much of which I actually share very much, and you can see my points to similar lines, what you said. But on the GVC for LDC's proposal, we definitely see the value of it. We can see that this initiative can play a very important role in generating interest towards the LDC exporters, lowering costs, and opening a clearer path to EU and other markets. And therefore, I do think that it will add an important element to support in expanding the LDC value-added trade. However, and as you, Amrita, posed the question, we must keep a firm focus on removing the existing challenges that LDCs face in the international trade. And this is the critical part in expanding the LDC participation in global value chains. The production and export of primary goods is very important, but we should also aim to increase the productive, as mentioned before me, mentioned the productive capacity of LDCs to benefit more of the value-added supply chains. And we need to continue to strengthen the LDCs capacity to participate and benefit fully from the international trade. And in terms of support, I heard what was mentioned about the EDFA trade support, but we still think that it remains very relevant in creating conducive business environment, strengthening productive capacity, innovation, and building economic infrastructure, i.e. aiming to strengthen and diversify the economic base of LDCs. But yes, you're right, we need to seek ways to enhance the EDFA trade support. For example, we would need to catalyze more concrete business partnerships. And this is exactly what we are concentrating now on and focusing in Finland, how to create more concrete business-to-business partnerships. And we have seen some positive, though small, but still positive examples how this can really catalyze the business and participating in value chains. Regarding the GVCs for LDCs initiative and the targeted support, like in terms of targeted support for trade, it could be also play an important role. Support to strengthen, for example, the organic agricultural value chains could demonstrate that success is possible, and then it could create a positive case for others to follow. I would also like to touch upon the sustainable parts of the trade and also inclusive trade. So we should always aim to extend benefits of trade to women, youths, and other vulnerable groups, including persons with disabilities. And it is equally important that the trade is environmentally sustainable and contributes towards fighting climate change and preserving biodiversity. Stephen mentioned something about the challenges that these requirements bring, and we definitely agree. And here comes again the support that we must create at the LDCs. Consumers are increasingly demanding sustainable products, and there are also new regulatory requirements coming up. There is an increasing tendency to make sure that the whole of the value chain is sustainable. And these trends will have an impact on suppliers in LDCs, and therefore we just need for the EDFA trade to be increasingly targeted also to support sustainability issues. So there is a scenario that these requirements could actually induce a positive case where we create a virtuous circle, a positive spiral leading to improved human rights and less negative environmental impacts. the EU companies would work closely with their partners in LDCs to address the bottlenecks and improve sustainability of the value chain. And sustainable production would become a competitive advantage. And this is actually what we also are aiming here in Finland in our business, that it must be the competitive advantage that is the sustainable production. But sustainability is the global mega trend, and we cannot get around on the sustainability requirements. So this is what we need to notably focus on in the future. But lastly, I would like to leave you with some information. In Finland, we have commissioned 2 studies on how the proposed EU corporate sustainability due diligence legislation will impact the developing countries, their trade and business. And these studies will be launched at the end of this month on the 27th of March, and we will open registration soon. So just to leave you with this information. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lena. We look forward to joining that. I'm sure it'll be an interesting event. I think, based on those 2 excellent contributions, Lucian, there's a big ask for you. And I'll add one of the areas of questions that have come from the audience. I think the first ask is that while there is potential and promise here for an initiative like GVCs for LDCs, how do we sort of demonstrate and show links with other types of development outcomes? One of the key questions asked is about food security. Lena asked about gender outcomes, sustainability. I know, not everything can be done there's no one solution for all. This is a good start, but how can we maybe start to show some of the links and, how this can be an important starting point for some of those areas? And the second question, which is probably something you've thought about already, is that what are the challenges for such an implementation such a scheme to be implemented in practice? How do we go forward with piloting and then actual implementation of that? So I'll pass over to you, Lucian, for, I think, sort of these 2 difficult questions to be responded to.
Yes, well, I was trying to type at some point some quick answers to our very active audience, who seems to have a keen interest in coming to grips with this proposal, understand the mechanics of it. Maybe it's easy to start with a food security question, which is a very legitimate question, and I think it's important to get things right when it comes to such crucial aspects. As far as I can say, at least in this microcosm of unique granular data of organic products, if you look at the export structure of LDCs in organics, you see that they really have these cash crops. They really try to create foreign earnings based on a handful of products, which may not be in of themselves sufficient for food security for these countries. Many LDCs are net food importers, so you cannot just eat vanilla every day, every 3 times a day. You cannot have all your a balanced meal on the basis of 1 or the 2 products, where currently LDCs are very good at generating export earnings in selling organic. So there is no way in which you could say, no, by exporting too much, we are going to take away the food from the people in those countries, because they don't eat that anyway. It's a choice between exporting them for a premium price or letting them rot on the field. So that's what the proposal would try to do, to maximize the foreign earnings for smallholders, for direct earnings for farmers, the kind of cash crops with which then they can buy food that they need to buy anyway. We've seen the major crisis that was triggered by the Ukraine war, where many LDCs were relying on some of the staple food imports that they, under no circumstances, can be produced at home. even climatic or other types of constraints. So they have to be imported anyway. In order to import them, you need the money. So this proposal will allow trade to be this development-driven, engage with the rest of the world for your own food security. So I think instead of jeopardizing food security, creating the necessary foreign earnings will allow LDCs to cushion the potential shocks on their food security from commodity crisis or geopolitical tensions or any other unforeseen circumstances. So in that sense, it's an enhancing element for food security. The second question you asked, Amrita, about the practicability, I think this is what really triggered a very keen interest from my side and the colleagues with whom I discussed this here. The fact that we have the trade infrastructure, a very sophisticated, very reliable trade infrastructure with digital certification of the origin of every single, take the label of a yogurt and look at all the ingredients. If it's an organic yogurt, the European legislation requires traceability of every single ingredient, even if it's a tiny proportion of that yogurt, to the actual origin. Now, if we were to take that evidentiary piece, the kind of documentation that we in Europe collect for the purpose of our own organic legislation for the safety and for the kind of the trust of our consumers, what prevents, say, a third country custom official to rely on the same evidentiary base that we in Europe have already put in this digital system called Traces, which 90 countries around the world are already connected to? It's not as if you have never heard of Traces. It's not as if you would say, yeah, but how do I know that these documents are correct? They are already there. They are developed with the highest level of trade facilitation parameters. So it's a matter of, I think, political will and engagement and dialogue to create this interest in saying, look, we may reuse these documents for the benefit of LDCs. They've taken the fixed cost of complying with all these trade facilitation, organic certification. Why shouldn't we reuse these documents when we export the yogurt with the mangoes from Madagascar? Why these documents can only stay in Europe? If they are available there, if we can have the arrangement with multiple jurisdictions to create a platform for LDCs to be given those preferences, I think it's a very, very promising starting point, precisely because we have the necessary tools to maybe run a pilot.
Perfect. I think we've got a little bit of time. So what I want to do now is to ask each of our fellow panelists for one final action point, which we want to send to the UN LDC5 agenda, starting with Lena. Lena, do you have a final point to highlight for the UN LDC5 agenda?
Yes, thank you very much. I think my final point will be the first point which I raised in my comments, and that would be that we must be really firm and keep the focus on removing the many challenges and use Ed for Trade for this in across the field in an innovative way, and referring to the expanding regulation that it is coming. We can't get around that. So we must keep this focus on removing the challenges for LDCs. And this is from the EU and Finnish perspective, and this is what we need to focus on in the future as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena. Over to Stephen.
So mine is to say that we know what makes it difficult for LDCs to raise their shares. And I think we need at this moment to sort of take the risk, if we may call it that way, to try something new. And what we have before us here is something new. Those trade practitioners know that the survival of exporting farms from developing countries, especially LDCs, is very low compared to other exporting farms from elsewhere. I think a tool or an instrument like this is giving us that opportunity to not only diversify the products, but also the potential to expand the markets. So I think to the LDC5, I think let's try something new. Let's take the risk. In any case, what amount of trade are we talking about? If you're moving only from 2% to want to go to 4%, and this is something that is going to help us to try that. That's what. Let's just take the risk if people see it as a risk.
Thank you, Stephen. I think we're underlining that it's the time for that bold action that's on the agenda. Closing remark from Lucian, GVC for LDCs. What's the one message you'd like to send to LDC5?
Well, I would simply say that to continue on Stephen's idea, taking the risk is even, I think, a very small price to pay in a sense, because Europe is not known for a risk-taking jurisdiction. In fact, I think we are one of the most risk-averse jurisdictions when it comes to standards and procedures. We have the famous precautionary principle. So you can take the risk while trusting us. If we have taken the risk, and if we have had in operation a system that allowed for products from LDCs to be safely certified, to let us all consumers enjoy that, let's take the same calculated risk. And I think it's a risk is the wrong word here. It's not really a risk. It's just the fact that we haven't probably explored it in the past. It's something new, but it's true. There is a bit of apprehension when it comes to new things. But the good news is that it's a small experiment. LDCs remain, unfortunately, a small player. We're talking about a handful of products to begin with, and we're talking about one of the best trade facilitation traceability tools in the world. So if here we cannot be adventurous, I wonder where.
Great. I think we've managed to end with a very clear action plan, and that is, let's be bold, let's take action, but let's keep sight of the existing challenges in a clear and systematic and informed way. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We hope to continue this conversation. Thank you, Lucian. Thanks, Stephen, and thanks, Lena, and to our audience online as well as on YouTube. We hope to see you next time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.